The vast majority of German routes in train sim world are focused on mundane electrified lines with a very generic mix of passenger and freight services. Take Wuppertal to Hagen, Köln to Aachen, Hamburg to Lübeck, and Bremen to Oldenburg, for example. There are only two exceptions to the rule at the time of uploading, in the form of the non-electrified / diesel-only Niedertalbahn and Maintalbahn. Seeing as I have already looked at the Niedertalbahn, we are instead looking at the Maintalbahn today. The Maintalbahn add-on was made by Dovetail Games and released on November 28, 2023, but it appeared as the 29th here in New Zealand due to time zone differences. For reference, I only play the PC version of Train Sim World 4, and the Steam version of the Maintalbahn DLC costs $43.59 NZD at the normal price. I pre-ordered the route and got a 10% discount as a result, which brought the price down to $39.23. I mean, I'd rather save a measly 10% than pay full price, especially since there are other things on which I would rather spend my money. Much like the Niedertalbahn, the route length here is not substantial at all. You only get the 37 kilometers, or roughly 23 miles of track from Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof to Miltenberg, with 12 intermediate stations. Part of the route, specifically the section from Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof through Aschaffenburg Süd to the nearby freight yard, is already in Train Sim World as part of the older Maintalbahn add-on. I'm not sure on exactly what time period the Maintalbahn add-on is set in, and it doesn't help that Dovetail didn't mention this in the product description on Steam. They never do. On the motive power scene, and in keeping with what seems like an unwritten rule of newer routes, Dovetail only included one new train with the Maintalbahn, and that's the Deutsche Bahn BR642 diesel multiple unit. This thing looks borderline identical to the DMUs that run the North County Transit District Sprinter service from Oceanside to Escondido, California in the USA. This was my attempt at a Sprinter livery for the BR642, made using the in-game livery designer. The BR642 is a semi-modern unit, having been introduced in 1998, with Deutsche Bahn now operating 234 examples of this class. This two-car unit is part of the Siemens Desiro family, and she was the third German DMU to feature in Train Sim World, behind the BR612 and BR628-2. DTG also included the BR363 diesel shunter with the Maintalbahn, or rather, they recycled the BR363 for the Maintalbahn, seemingly disregarding the fact that we've had this blasted thing on 3 previous routes already. There was the original Deutsche Bahn Red livery released as an add-on for Ruhr-Sieg Nord, then the older blue and white livery that first appeared as part of Riesa to Dresden, but it has since been reused for Dresden to Chemnitz, and now Aschaffenburg to Miltenberg as well. Quite frankly, I'm tired of seeing Dovetail recycle locomotives over and over again, especially when they don't bother updating the model at all. They've done this before with the Deutsche Bahn BR185-2 and EWS Class 66, but at least the 66 has been updated with actually decent sounds. And I don't care about any reasoning or excuses DTG may have for reusing locomotives so many times. I simply do not want to pay for unchanged locomotives that I already have. And surely I'm not the only one who thinks this way. This older blue and white livery looks out of place on a modern image route, especially since I thought it came from the Deutsche Bundesbahn era, so now I'm even more confused as to why Dovetail reused the BR363 for the Maintalbahn. I didn't think it was unreasonable to want a route add-on to include at least 2 engines that are actually new to the game, instead of nearly always getting one new and the rest recycled. I swear the engine sounds on the BR642 are reused from the BR612, but if that's not actually the case, then the BR642's sounds are scarily similar. This situation is reminiscent of DTG's awful rendition of the Österreichische Bundesbahn in Class 4024, or Talent 1, that comes with S-Bahn Vorarlberg, and this unit has completely inaccurate sounds reused from the Talent 2. At the very least, the 642's horn is a recording that I haven't heard before, although I think it sounds better from inside the cab. Besides the questionable sounds, two other things I noticed on the BR642 were the unusually large windows close to the inner ends of the coaches, as well as the roof-mounted air conditioning units that look identical to those on the Class 360 EMUs in England. This doesn't really surprise me, given that the 360s are also part of the Siemens Desiro family. Five scenarios are included with this route, and the only one I could be bothered trying was called On Your Bike. And there are so many people and companies to which I'd like to use that phrase, given the chance. This is a very weak scenario concept, as it only involves you, while playing as the driver because this game still only has one tiny case where you play as a guard, looking for a passenger's lost bike at every station on the run from Sulzbach to Miltenberg. I wouldn't have thought that a driver in real life would be concerned with someone else's property, seeing as they've got an important job to do that requires no distractions. Timetable mode includes 94 playable services for the BR642 and only 14 for the BR363. Some of the 642's services, specifically the depot moves, are split into multiple parts, for whatever reason. Annoyingly, two of the BR363's services are split into multiple parts as well, and after the failure of the Antelope Valley Line add-on, not to mention the timetable mode on the Glossop line, I've gotten tired of seeing services split into multiple parts, because it artificially increases the number of playable services for a locomotive or unit. In other words, the multi-part services give the illusion of the locomotives and units having more services than what they actually do. The BR642 represents the RB88 local and RE87 express services between Aschaffenburg and Miltenberg, with the required time to cover the full route depending on your stopping pattern. It's only around 52 minutes at most. Meanwhile, the BR363 is used to shunt freight wagons in the Aschaffenburg area, with only one trip down to Miltenberg in the entire 24-hour schedule. Besides the overused BR363 and newly added BR642, you can also drive the BR612 and BR628 diesel multiple units on this route, as they can substitute for the BR642's services. Meanwhile, the Vossloh G6 locomotive can substitute for the BR363's services. I'm no expert on the real line, but I didn't think the BR612 would have ever run on this route in real life, and the same goes for the G6. But at least the G6 is a well-made locomotive that's fun to drive, while the BR612 is convoluted and rather difficult to drive. Although the BR612 feels very out of place on the Maintalbahn, I still like being able to run this unit in non-electrified territory for once, given that the Dresden to Chemnitz route, with which the BR612 is included, is entirely electrified. I want to review that route at some point, but there's so many video ideas I'm trying to decide on that I don't know when I'll cover Taranto Ramp. I'm surprised that the BR204 doesn't layer onto the Maintalbahn, considering the fact that this thing is an add-on for Maintalbahn that allowed access to the non-electrified sidings in Aschaffenburg. These are, of course, the same sidings that reappeared on the Maintalbahn add-on, in the same way that Dovetail blatantly reused the poorly detailed Newark Airport to Sunnyside Yard section of the NEC for the god-awful New York to Trenton pack. You'll also see locomotives and multiple units from other add-ons running AI-only services through Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof, but only if you own those other add-ons. To be more specific, these units and locomotives are the BR425 from Bremen to Oldenburg, despite being completely out of place for this region, the BR401 ICE 1 and BR403 ICE 3 from Kassel to Würzburg, Railpool BR193 Vectron with ZA CNS wagons, and the boring BR146-2 with criminally overused Doppelstockwagen coaches and BR185-2 from Maintalbahn. With the presence of the ICE 1 and ICE 3 on the Maintalbahn version of Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof, I find it very strange that the Maintalbahn version is still lacking ice layers all these years later. My first impressions of the trackside scenery were not good, to the point where I feel like it completely ruins the add-on. For starters, I thought it looked weirdly similar to S-Bahn-Vorarlberg, especially in the autumn, and we all know how disappointing that Austrian thing was. It looks like the section from Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof to Aschaffenburg Süd and the docks was recycled straight from Maintalbahn without any noticeable changes. Examples of poor details include the atrocious overhead wires at the western end of Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof, this floating fence next to the Karlstrasse crossing at Kleinwallstadt, cars sinking into the ground at Obernburg-Elsenfeld, the often lifeless streets reminiscent of early TSW routes before they were updated, this big flat grass patch at Klingenberg am Main, and the enormous blank hillside that's clearly visible from Kleinheubach, the last station before Miltenberg. One of the few bits of scenery that I kind of like is this representation of a waterslide and swimming pool, otherwise known as Main Schwimmbad Klingenberg am Main, although the grass texture around the pool looks pretty bad. I also like this bridge across the Main River just outside Miltenberg, although in some weather conditions it does look a bit weird without any reflections in the water. Another thing I like is this new model of a smaller passenger information screen, which is present at all stations on the line except Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof and Miltenberg. I also like the hilly surroundings of Klingenberg am Main, as this area reminds me of the München to Garmisch-Partenkirchen route in TS Classic. And that's a route I'd really like to see remade in TSW, complete with the BR426 and a new variant of the Talent 2 EMU that we don't have in TSW yet. To be specific, this is the 4-car BR2442 variant with Verden-Felsbahn decals. Thinking back to Klingenberg am Main, it's disappointing to see that the distant trees look just about as bad as those on the Arosa line. The fields next to Erlenbach actually have halfway decent grass details, instead of the usual story where Dovetail doesn't bother putting on the proper details, leaving the field looking ugly and blank as a result. That issue appears too many times to count on S-Bahn-Vorarlberg. As if the overall scenery quality wasn't bad enough, the driving experience on the BR642 isn't any better, not helped by the fact that the environment presented to us in this add-on feels borderline lifeless. As I alluded to earlier, there are loads of empty streets clearly visible from the track, and these remind me of the ancient TSW routes like Rapid Transit and Ruhrsieg Nord before they got updated. While the BR642's throttle is more conventional than those on the BR363 and BR612, it doesn't have notches like the BR628. Instead, the 642's throttle lever is smooth, but it's way too sensitive to keyboard inputs, and it feels like it's sliding on ice. This means that you often run the risk of applying way more traction or braking power than what you actually need. Indeed, I've had a few cases where I've entered platforms at a comically low speed due to the overly sensitive throttle and brake lever. After trying out that disappointing on-your-bike scenario, I tried a timetable mode service, specifically the 9:15 AM RB88 service from Miltenberg to Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof. It was mostly an unremarkable trip, not helped by the quiet rail scene. Indeed, I only remember meeting 2 southbound trains throughout the entire run, and the other problem was the general lack of any significant inclines on the route. The steepest gradient I remember seeing was only around 1 in 87, and that was the descent out of Miltenberg station. I also tried driving the BR628-2 on the 1354 RB88 service from Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof to Miltenberg. This unit is quite well made, and would you look at that, it's not a Dovetail product. As a result, I quite enjoy driving this thing, but I did not like the unreasonably tight timetable. I found that even if you leave Aschaffenburg Hauptbahnhof on time, there is barely any time allowed to get to the first station. And then, you're somehow expected to get from Aschaffenburg Hochschule to Aschaffenburg Süd in only 30 seconds, which is impossible. Soon after leaving Aschaffenburg Süd, you will get held at a red signal to wait for a northbound train to clear the single-line section. But by the time this thing shows up, you are left with nowhere near enough time to reach the next station, Obernau, on time, and it's difficult, if not impossible, to make up for lost time throughout the rest of the journey. This problem with a tight timetable isn't exclusive to the 1354 off of Aschaffenburg, and I wonder how much, if any, testing DTG did for these services before releasing this add-on. Although the Maintalbahn is by no means a high-speed line, trains on this line are at least faster than the Niedertalbahn, because the maximum permitted speed here is 120 km per hour. Meanwhile, on the Bad Vilbel to Stockheim line, the speed limit is only 60 km per hour. After exploring the Maintalbahn route a decent number of times, I've decided that I can't recommend it, but there are still a couple of good aspects about it that I want to summarise. I still like the concept of a single-track diesel-only line, given the boring and predictable nature of most German routes in this game, and it's nice to be able to get the BR628-2 up to a decent speed for once. But that's about it for positives, I'm afraid. With the existence of this add-on, it feels to me as if Dovetail tried to replicate the success of the Niedertalbahn, but either missed or ignored what made that route good to begin with, just so they could rush it out to release for the sake of immediate earnings. That practice will eventually do them in, I'm sure of it. I realised too late that I was a fool to hope that the Maintalbahn DLC would at least be decent, despite the interesting concept, and I wouldn't mind seeing more German diesels added to TSW in future, provided that they are made well. The add-on is spoiled by the dodgy sounds and throttle lever physics on the BR642, the inclusion of only one train that's actually new to TSW, underwhelming S-Bahn Vorarlberg-esque scenery, and a lifeless environment. The only saving grace in the whole ordeal is the route concept itself, and the opportunity to run the BR612 and BR628 on another non-electrified line. Especially after taking the lifeless environment into consideration, it almost feels to me like Dovetail are innovating backwards, if that makes any sense, and I wouldn't be surprised if they think that we'll just buy any old crap they release, as if we had no standards. Well, Dovetail higher-ups, in the unlikely event that any of you are actually watching, I am here to tell you that we, as passionate rail fans, players and customers, do not appreciate having our intelligence insulted like that. After all, not all TSW players are fanboys high on blind optimism. And to those fanboys, I say, in the words of Brett Cooper, you are living in delusion land. Based on what I've seen in the comments on some of my previous reviews, it seems like more and more people are getting increasingly sick of your laziness, greed, and incompetence, myself included. And Dovetail, if you insist on retaining this awful business model until the cows come home, then you should be prepared for the eventual collapse of your company. Or are you too full to swallow your pride?